Okay, friends, welcome to the Places You'll Go. I hope you're enjoying this series. It's fun for me. I know today I want to take you to several places. I want to take you to Assisi. That's what you can see on the screen behind me. I want to take you to the Sea of Galilee. I want to go to Montgomery, Alabama, and then to Memphis, Tennessee. And it'd be interesting, and the topic really is call. I use this phrase many times, is the secret for us Christians. It's not what do I want to do, and it's not even what do I want to do for God, but what does God want me to do? And how do we know this? We can find this in places. So Assisi, St. Francis, before he was St. Francis, he was a guy. He was wealthy, he was popular, he sang French songs, he was cool. He was like the most popular young guy in Assisi. He didn't just hear his call being in that comfortable place, though. He went down, down, down. If you come to Assisi with me sometime, I'll take you there. It goes down this very steep hill. We always walk down there. Down, 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 not to a splendid place, but to a shabby place, a church called San Damiano. And it looks pretty today, of course. They've made it nice for tourists. But when Francis was there, the church had fallen into disuse. The stones were crumbling. He rebuilt it with his own hands. Very interesting. And there he prayed repeatedly. Now we think about the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. The prayer that Francis actually prayed day by day, I created this little folded thing. I've given these to a lot of people in groups over the years. It's got a picture of Francis on the back, and on the front, it shows the artist Giotto painted Francis praying this prayer, which he prayed day by day by day in that little shabby church, San Damiano. Inside, there's a crucifix. He knelt before this crucifix, and here's the prayer that he prayed to discern what God was calling him to do. Most high, glorious God, enlighten the darkness of my heart, and give me, O Lord, correct faith, firm hope, perfect charity, wisdom and perception, that I may do what is your most holy will. I love that prayer. If you prayed that for the rest of your life, a lot of good things would happen. What he did down in that valley, see, he left the safety and security of the walled city of Assisi and went steep down that hill. And who lived down there? It was a colony of lepers. Everybody avoided the lepers. Francis read his Bible and thought, well, Jesus touched lepers. So what Francis did to learn his calling, he didn't stay where he was comfortable. He went down and met people that other people didn't want to be around, people that were different, the poorest of the poor. So often we do Bible study in comfortable places with people that are like us, and it's no wonder we get this kind of jaded view of what God might be asking us. St. Francis he converted a pig farm into a leper colony so that he could treat lepers, and it's not just that God called him to do that, that's where he discovered God's call. Way down in a place like that. Of course, then when I take pilgrims there, we got to climb back up that hill. It's a long way back up, and it was hard for Francis. He'd gone down, 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 but then he had to go back up that hill because there were difficulties ahead. He had to encounter his parents and friends who didn't understand. I think about my calling, and my calling wasn't primarily to be a minister. I was just a guy. My first calling was to be a follower of Jesus. And that really caught on when I was in college. And I didn't say, Lord, I want a career as a pastor so I can be the senior minister at Myers Park one day. I fell in love with Jesus. I'd like to run some errands for you. You tell me what they are and I'll go run those errands. I don't know how I came to hear that call. It's probably a lot of things. Grandparents taking me to church when I was a child. Quirky things that happen. My parents were mortified by this. They had other dreams for me, same as St. Francis. We'll talk about that another day. One of the things that's interesting, though, is we begin to hear God's call. And it takes time, it takes reflection, just push a button like a machine and you get God's call. It takes a long time. You got to change your location. You got to leave time. What God would he ask me to do? Also, what I love, stories of calling, it's open-ended. When Francis first started, he didn't know how all that was going to turn out. So it requires some courage. It requires some trust. Abraham, the Old Testament, first guy that God seems to call. God says, come to a land that I will show you. I'm sure if I'm Abraham, I'd say, well, what's the address? Where is it on a map? And God just says, come to a land that I will show you. If you come with me to that land one day, I'll take you to a place where there's a city gate at a place called Dan, and it's almost in Lebanon. And it's the very city gate that Abraham walked through. It's one of my favorite archaeological sites, like Abraham walked through this gate. It's absolutely incredible. Jesus comes to this fisherman by the Sea of Galilee, and I love this. The archaeologists found a boat, like a preserved boat from the time of Jesus. It kind of reminds us, these are real people doing real things. They were real fishermen. They had a real business there by the sea. And Jesus says, come and follow me. If I'm them, I'm going to ask, well, where are we going? How's it going to work out? How much energy is it going to take? What's it going to cost? But they just go. Hearing God's call, it just requires some courage. And you just go, and you don't always know how it's going to turn out. Now, this video is going to come out close to our nation's Martin Luther King holiday. Martin Luther King, pretty interesting. He had a call to ministry. His dad was a pastor. That wasn't that unusual. He went off to seminary. He was a great student. And he received a call, a job offer, from the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. He did not go there to be the leader of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King went there because that was a comparatively wealthy, well-educated church, and this really suited his sense of, I want to be a successful minister and a well-heeled congregation. I mean, that's why it was a very fine place. But when he got there and started working, it turned out that church, the location matters. It was, you could throw a rock from there to the state capital of Alabama, there in Montgomery. It's right in the shadow of the state capitol. So he was looking for power and success, but there he was, right there at the state capitol. Right up the street in the other direction is where Rosa Parks, a Methodist, I love to brag, refused to get off the bus. Now, King wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't trying to lead the civil rights movement. It found him, if you will. I mean, people started gathering at the state capitol. You think George Wallace making speeches and all, Rosa Parks gets in jail. It's just all around Martin Luther King, and it turns out he's a pretty good speaker. And so they press him. He didn't find the civil rights movement. It found him. The hour chose him. Sometimes our calling is being attentive to the times of what's going on in the world and what out there, like, instead of complaining about it, we think this has to change. Maybe that's God's call. When that happens, what's going on in the world. One of the things I like to say about God's call is it's not just a matter of your ability. You like to look at your abilities. Do I have ability to do certain things? I'm good at certain things. I want to offer that up to God. What God's interested in clearly in the Bible isn't ability, but availability. Am I available to God? When I started hearing a call to ministry, people had said to me, your brain is well geared toward chemistry and physics. You shouldn't do the humanities kind of thing. I didn't have that ability. I couldn't stand up in front of anybody and speak. A lot of times, God's more interested in our availability. Are you willing to go? And are you even willing to discover your calling? It's not your strengths, but maybe it's where you've been broken. Leonard Cohen. Love Leonard Cohen. I mean, what an awful singing voice, but oh my goodness, he's produced so much good stuff. Leonard Cohen has that great line, everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in, right? So you look at where you've been broken, where have you been wounded, not just your strengths and your abilities. So it requires some courage. It requires, I thought about this, putting your Christian formation on the line. Martin Luther King didn't look up one day and say, I'll lead the civil rights movement. He'd grown up in church. He'd been to a zillion Bible studies, prayed, worshiped. You do those things over and over. Rosa Parks. She was a well-formed, disciplined Methodist person, which is part of what gave her the courage to say, I'm not going to give up my seat on this bus. When King went to Dexter Avenue, the parsonage is a few blocks away. And I've been in that parsonage several times. There's a kitchen there. It's a great kitchen. It's where King wanted to give up one night, midnight, made a cup of coffee, and he said God spoke to him in that kitchen. It's a tiny kitchen. The other interesting thing, though, about the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church parsonage is that one night King was making a speech over at Ralph Abernathy's church, and somebody came and got him and said, there's been an explosion at your house. He knew that his wife and his young daughter were in the house. When he got there, it was in flames. You can imagine his terror. Some KKK men had set off a bomb on the front porch. If you stand on that porch, there's a little plaque there that shows exactly where the bomb was detonated. I stood on that porch years ago with my son Noah when he was a little boy. And one of the things that the plaque shows is what King said. And you can imagine the African-American community of Montgomery showed up at that point, and they were like, we can't put up with this stuff anymore. I mean, they're firebombing your house. And King's response, it only shows that he'd been formed as a Christian for a long time, because he says, don't do anything panicky, don't get your weapons. Remember what God said. We want to love our enemies. We want to be good to them. What we are doing is right. What we are doing is just. God is with us. That's just jaw-dropping to me. And the cool thing, I stood on that porch with my son and this guy that had been driving the trolley that we were going around to see all these sights in. I read that out loud to my son, and this older gentleman said, I was here that night. He said, I was about the age of your son. I said, what was that like? He talked about it, how scared everybody was, but how fed up everybody was. Amazing. You got to get out of your comfort and go somewhere. If you go somewhere, many things happen. King said, don't go get your weapons, put your weapons away. There were men with weapons, though, they came after Martin Luther King. I'm going to be in Memphis soon, and there's a lot of fun stuff doing in Memphis. You go like great barbecue and Graceland, Elvis, and so on. When I go to Memphis, I always pay a visit to the Lorraine Motel. King had gone there in 1968 to make a speech on behalf of the striking garbage workers there. He stayed at the Lorraine Motel, and it's been preserved since he was killed there on the balcony. You can go to the motel, and then you can actually stand up at King's room on that balcony and look across the street where James Earl Ray trained his sights on him and shot him. It's one of our really great national monuments. You get a feel for the place. King had been there with his closest friends. They'd had a pillow fight the night before. They were having fun, but they were doing good. They were men full of great joy, and King walked out there, and it cost him his life. There's so many martyrs for people who they try to do what God asked them to do. Jesus being one. One of the things that King said that I love is this. He said, there are some things that are so dear, some things so precious, some things so eternally true that they are worth dying for. And I submit to you that if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. I don't know what to do with that, but those words inspire me, and it makes me think, what am I really committed to? How often do I just play it safe for me and enjoy thinking about things from the privacy and security of my own home? Maybe God's asking me to go somewhere, do something, go down like St. Francis did. Talking about call, I want to add on at the end here a short little conversation that I had with a young pastor who she not only has been hearing God's call, she works with people who are hearing God's call. I think you'll enjoy this. All right, friends, let me introduce you to my friend, Emily Miles. Emily, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
You're down in Atlanta?
That's right.
Although you're really from North Carolina. You moved to Atlanta because you got married and your husband is working there. And now you're with child.
That's right, yeah. We met at Candler School of Theology when we were both in seminary.
And that's where you work now.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
You work in admissions.
Yes.
I remember when I went to Duke, I remember meeting with the admissions director. And I was asked, why do you want to go to seminary? I didn't know. I mean, it was terrible. So with students that you see wanting to come to divinity school, to seminary, what do you think they're sensing in terms of calling?
Yeah.
What do you hear? What do you think?
Oh, it's so varied. It's all across the board. I talked to so many different types of students, really exploring many different paths and callings towards ministry. At Candler, we've identified 4 kind of primary motivations for people coming to seminary. One of them is this articulation of, I have a call to pastoral ministry. That's one group of people. Other folks are interested in academia or teaching. Other students are interested in social justice work. And then we have a group of students who are interested in spiritual exploration. They just want to come here to learn more and to enrich their lives more. Those are kind of the four main buckets that we see students coming to Candler for. But I mean, it's just across the board. Some people, knew they wanted to come to seminary since they were a child. Like, I spoke to someone not long ago who said they'd known since they were 10 years old.
Oh, man.
It's like, that's really impressive. Other people won't learn till later,
But hearing about those four buckets, I mean, I would have ranked academics and spirituality as my only two out of that bunch. I was not thinking about doing here you are. It evolves over time, doesn't it? Right? It's not like you get one call and that's it. And I always think for people in seminary, it's tricky because you got to be able to articulate. It's not like God calls pastors and seminary people, but God doesn't call others. God calls everybody.
Right.
And anyway, yeah. So I should tell our folks, the way I know Emily, she's way cool. So of course she's somebody you'd want to know, but also she's in a group of clergy wannabes that are going through our ordination process, and it's a group that I've had the great privilege to meet with. So Emily, you're processing all this yourself. How did you come to sense that God was calling you? I always think God, when I first heard God's call, I think I love Jesus and I want to run some errands for him, like whatever they would be. That was my calling. But then it gradually became this. So how do you think you heard, beyond the general call to be a Christian, the idea of going to seminary and becoming a minister?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like you said, it's not static, right? I think it's always changing and evolving. Even now, I know, 5 years from now, my calling will be slightly different, likely. And I think that's just being able to be attentive to God and how God is moving in my life. For me, it was a very gradual kind of understanding and process. And I think my calling and all of our callings are always there, but we start to understand them a little bit more when we cultivate spiritual disciplines, when we have Christian community with one another, when we experience different things in our lives, and we just have more conversations with God. I really learned to understand my calling actually through a moment of hardship in my life, which is not uncommon for a lot of people. Sometimes it takes a little bit of jarring to understand, where am I and am I supposed to be here? Is there a different path that maybe I want to explore? And so it took a health crisis in my own life to help me reflect on where I currently am and see how God might be moving me towards something different. So it was really both spiritual disciplines, self-reflection, exploring scripture, and a whole lot of courage that helped me to see God is leading me towards this path, towards ordained ministry specifically. And it's risky because as confident as I try to be about my calling, we all know we could get it wrong, right? And so I think it's just constant questioning and saying, here I am, God, like, use me, but try to give me some reasonable explanation for where I'm supposed to go.
Well, I mean, two things about that. I always think about when Jesus, God calls Abraham and says, go to a land that I will show you. He doesn't say where or how it's going to work out. Jesus calls those fishermen and they drop their nets and follow him. He doesn't say where they're going, what the strategy is, how it's going to work out. So there is always you just go.
Right.
And then I think about that Thomas Merton quote that everybody loves that I haven't memorized, but it's, God, I want to do your will. I may not get it right, but I believe that the desire to do your will is pleasing to you. I love that. You worked, I know this, you worked near Charlotte as a youth pastor. And so we try to help our youth think not, the world will say, go be a doctor, go be a banker, go whatever. And we try to say to them, yeah, that God might be calling. Who knows what God's calling you to? Can you be open to that? So you worked with youth. How would you, though, not just with youth, but people in general, somebody comes to you, Reverend Miles, I think I hear you talking about God's call. I want to figure out what God's calling me to. How would you counsel them?
Yeah. One of the first questions I like to ask is, what gets you excited? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What gives you life? What makes you hopeful about the future? I think oftentimes if we can kind of dig down there, a calling is like a seed, I think, within us. It's always there. We can try to ignore it, but it's something that really requires this nurturing, this care, and a whole lot of time to develop and mature. So I try to help people figure out that seed that's deep within them. Sometimes it comes from a passion. Sometimes it comes from a life experience. It could come from external conversations from other people, validation. Well, this person has told me I'm really good at thinking analytically. I don't know. All of these different passions and gifts could be an indication of a path that might be worth exploring.
Yeah, and you mentioned having a health crisis. I always think also just the crises all around us, so not just in us, but out there in the world. And when do the troubles of the world become a calling, right? You see whoever it is that's suffering out there, and you say that this has to change, but instead of blaming the government or somebody, you raise your hand and you say, I'll go.
Yeah.
I want to be part of the solution to that.
Yeah, and that's just being able to lament and seeing the hardships of the world and saying that something's not right, that is such an indication of hope. Yeah. And saying that I've got to do something. I mean, what's more beautiful than that? To say, I don't know how much I can fix, but I've got to do something. I think that's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I think when everything's being jostled around and we're being shaken and there's all these things happening, sometimes a calling can be our root to steady us and to anchor us and to help us see a path for which to move forward.
I mean, I loved your seed image, and then talking about the beauty of it. Quotes always float into my head. They're never quite exact. But St. Augustine said, hope has two beautiful daughters. One is anger at the way things are, and the other is courage to see to it that they don't remain the way they are. That's a calling, right? We're going to be people of hope. I'm not called to whatever I'm called to because it's necessarily the most fun thing. There's a lot of joy in it,
right?
But also it takes some courage. But it's all about hope. It's all about hope.
I agree.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us and for your ministry and time, and blessings on you and your family. 2023 is going to be one big year for you guys.
It is, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right. God bless you.